Face coverings, regular testing and classroom bubbles. Not the school days we're used to. But after months of lessons at the kitchen table, millions of children have returned to the classroom today, as schools in England were given the go-ahead to officially reopen to all students. This is COVID and the classroom. Back to school. Good evening. After months of disruption throughout the pandemic, students in England are now able to return to the classroom. The Prime Minister called today an emotional day, the first stage of the government's plan to ease lockdown restrictions in England, with Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland opting for a phased reopening. Tonight, we'll be looking at what measures have been put in place to keep children and teachers safe and assess the long-term implications on education and mental health and what's being done to catch up. Tonight, I'll be joined by two panels. Here we have a number of students and a few parents who can tell us about their first day back at school. And they'll be putting their questions to our other panel, where we have Richard Sheriff, the President and CEO of Red Kite Learning Trust, which runs 13 schools in North and West Yorkshire. He's also the Executive Head Teacher of Harrogate Grammar School. Next to him, we're streeting the Shadow Minister for Schools. And finally, Dr Bernadette Dubiker, Chair of the Child and Adolescent Faculty at the Royal College of Psychiatrists. Welcome to you all. Well, first of all, let's go to Lewis and Josh Seal. Lewis is in Year 11, so doing GCSEs. And Josh, you're doing your A-levels in Year 13. How did it go first day back at school? Lewis?
I think it was brilliant. It was so nice to have a change of scenery from the bedroom and sitting at a desk all day to suddenly being in a classroom, actively learning alongside your peers. And it's so nice to actually be taught by a teacher in person rather than from a computer screen.
Josh, you're nodding your head there.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with him. I think it was really nice to go and see friends finally after such a long time. And yeah, I think it definitely helps having face-to-face contact with teachers rather than online teaching.
OK, we'll be back to both of you later in the programme. Now, on the first ever COVID and the classroom in January, we heard from Lauren Nolan and her two children, Frank and Bill. The family, like many, were battling through the pressures of homeschooling. Well, this morning, Frank, who's 4, went back to school. Here's how their morning went.
First day back at school. Are you excited?
This morning is back to school for Frank, who's in reception. All yesterday he was saying that he doesn't want to go back to school, he just wants to stay home. So yeah, hoping that he is fine when he gets there.
Well, such an exciting day. Many parents, myself, hands up, very, very keen to have school starting back today. Let's bring in Pippa Taylor now. Pippa's in Year 6. Hi Pippa, how did it go for you? What was it like being back with all your friends?
Hi, it was really nice to see everyone, and I got to work with my friends, which is much better than just typing into a computer.
Oh, I'm sure it is much better, actually seeing people in the flesh. Well, we've heard there from Pippa. Now, time to hear from the teachers and their side of things. Richard Sheriff, the Executive Head Teacher of Harrogate Grammar School. What was it like for you? I'm going to ask you, what was it like on your first day back?
Well, I stood outside the gates today with the colleagues who are leading the school, and there was a sense of kind of joy, fun, eager anticipation, relief, all of those together. And it was like watching people reunited with old friends, watching the students come up, and they were so pleased to be in school and really grateful for all the efforts being made. and doing everything they could to comply with all the safety things and how to get tested and so forth. It was just great. It honestly was such a happy, positive day today.
What's the thing that students most said to you, do you think, today?
I think the thing students were saying actually was not a great deal, because during the course of the day they were coming in, queuing up, speaking to each other, coming in, having a brief chat with staff, going through the whole testing rigmarole, and then leaving to come back then full time. So the conversation was quite limited today. I think the most part they were just kind of getting over the shock of being out of bed so early for many of them, to be able to see each other and be able to see teachers again, walk into school. It's been such a long time for many of them. So I think with the conversation be fairly limited. I think they will open up and have lots of conversation when they come back properly together in social time, and also in lessons. As you know, Lewis and Josh were saying, it makes such a difference seeing each other face to face, and being able to have that informal contact with children rather than over the internet.
Absolutely. I bet it was a rude awakening, though, when that alarm went off. They're not used to that anymore. Let's get our first question now from Faith Oliver, who's in year 12 and actually joined in the first episode of COVID in the classroom. Faith, welcome back to you. What was your first day like?
Well, we actually haven't fully returned to college yet. My sixth form decided it was best to take a phased return approach, because it was easier to test the sheer amount of pupils that we have. So a lot of pupils won't actually be back face-to-face until the 22nd. However, I've been in the whole time throughout lockdown and have seen people go to get the tests to get ready to come back to school, and they've all been really excited to be able to come back.
Yeah, I can imagine. What's your question to the panel?
My question is, do you actually believe that it is safe for pupils right now to be back, given that the sage advice was to go for a phased return and the government has opted against that?
OK, let's put that question to the panel. Wes Streeting, do you want to answer that question for us? Is it 110% safe to be back in the classroom?
About 110%. I mean, the Prime Minister acknowledged today that with the return of schools, there is obviously a risk that infection rates go up, and what we're all trying to do is balance risks here. We're trying to balance against the risk of the virus spreading and getting out of control, and frankly the way it has done on a number of occasions, but also recognising that the longer that children and young people are out of school, there is also a consequence both in terms of health and education there. And we've argued all the way through that schools and colleges should be among the last to close and the first to reopen, because we understand, particularly sort of listening to the panel members already this evening, the difference that being in school makes. So, look, I mean, we've had arguments with the government about whether or not they could and should have done more. I mean, we've argued for the vaccination of all school staff, for example, and we think the government could and should have acted a lot quicker on things like testing and the safety measures. But I hope that people will be returning to school and feel confident about that. And I really do take my hat off, particularly to the school and college leaders who've been busting a gut. It's not been easy for them this last year. And sometimes the guidance has chopped and changed. We had real difficulties at the beginning of the year in January, because the government was literally changing the rules from one day to the next. But hopefully schools and colleges have had more time now, are ready and prepared, and if they are experiencing challenges, we want to hear about that, because we've got to keep the government's feet to the fire and make sure that schools and colleges are receiving the support they need to keep their staff and students safe.
OK, Wes Streeting for the moment, thank you. Well, as we've been hearing, there have been a lot of changes implemented in schools. Just bring some of those up for you. Twice weekly test for secondary school pupils. That's going to be very different. Face coverings to be worn in secondary schools, and that means during lessons in the classroom. Not necessarily the case for primary schools. That's optional. And also we know that staff are going to be tested. So quite a different environment. Let's go to our students and back to Faith. Faith, what have you felt about the changes? It's an awful lot to take on, isn't it?
I am sorry to completely go against what Wes just said. As somebody who has been in the whole time, I don't see schools as safe currently, not for a lot of young people. Testing isn't mandatory. Mask wearing isn't mandatory. Students aren't social distancing. I have had thousands and thousands of young people message me on social media when they found out I was coming on again to tell me that they are terrified to bring it home to parents with cancer, to younger siblings. I'm terrified of bringing it home to my profoundly autistic younger brother, and the government seems to have no recognition of what's actually going on. There's the vulnerable category, and then there's everyone else just going. We have no recognition. It's terrifying, and so many of us are absolutely petrified.
OK, Faith, thank you very much for that. Well, Dr Dubica, quite worrying. Faith is not assured that it's actually safe to be back in the classroom there.
I can sympathise with what Faith is saying, because the Royal College of Psychiatrists have always said that children should be the priority, opening up classrooms should be the priority. However, we were concerned back in September at the way it was done, for the very reason that Faith described. So in my clinic, I do see a lot of children, young people, who are very anxious for the same reasons that Faith's talking about. They may have, parents at home who are shielding, they may be very worried themselves. However, we do feel much more reassured about the way this is being done this time. And it does seem to be done in a much more graduated way, but it is absolutely important that there is support for those children, young people who do feel anxious. So we know from what we see in the clinics, and we know from the data, that many children, young people are resilient. They will bounce back, they will be okay. Some have actually thrived during this pandemic being at home, particularly, for example, children with autism. But the sad reason for that is because they have struggled in school before. So it's going to be so important that those children, young people get the right support when they go back.
No, very, very important indeed. Well, of course, there's been a lot of time spent out of the classroom, so attention now turns to making up for a lot of that lost time. Teachers and pupils and, of course, parents are now faced with the enormous task of trying to catch up. At the weekend on Sky News, the Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson, said that nothing was off the table. Those were his exact words. Let's go straight now to a question from Sadif Najmi, who's joined by her children, Hawa, who's in Year 5, Safia, who's in Year 4, and Ikra, who's in Year 1. What's your question on this issue?
Hi, I'd just like to say that, first of all, I completely agree with everything that Wes has said. I just think, 100% everything he said. And I just want to know that I know it's been suggested that longer school days and cutting school holidays short would be, a possibility to try and get children to catch up with their work. I'm just wanting to ask, would that not put added pressure onto teachers who have already been through so much and have worked tirelessly throughout this pandemic? Is it fair on them? And is it fair on the children and the parents like myself who have worked tirelessly as well to, ensure our children are homeschooling every single day?
OK, thank you for that question. Richard Sheff, I think this is one for you. Added pressure on teachers, is that fair?
Yeah, I think some of these things could represent added pressure on teachers, and that's not something we need just at the moment. But we are all absolutely aware of the challenge of making good on what has been lost. And we generally think that the best way of doing that is not through gimmicks or sign bats or kind of sudden interventions, but really good quality, ordinary classroom teaching as regular and as quickly as possible, and getting them back to school is part of that. The comment about longer school days and holidays is an interesting idea that's been thought of before. It's whether the evidence supports that will actually improve outcomes. If you've got a child in the early years of primary and they're going to school for the first time or every day, they're often absolutely exhausted at the end of the current length of the school day. To keep them longer is not going to probably add to their learning experience. In secondary, we could have a longer day. It might create more, but again, it may create resentment. It may create issues with attendance. And one of the things I think we've learned during COVID is that children can learn very effectively online, not all the time. That should not be the main form of delivery. But I think there's a possibility by stretching the school day, by using some of the things we've learned about remote learning, to combine that with great teaching in the classroom, face-to-face, day in, day out, but also children doing more of their work, well supported through the medium of the technology we started using. So I think there's a variety of things. I don't think we should close our minds to any option that will make a difference for young people, but I think we just have to weigh up the positives and negatives about every option we go down. And let's just return to the main thing. If we get children back, as was just said about children, they're resilient, they will bounce back. let them get back into school under normal circumstances, as normal as possible, and start to get that classroom teaching back. That's the best thing we can do for them now, make it look just like it was before.
Wes Streeting, slightly alarming to hear there from Faith that she's really concerned about the safety of being back in the classroom. And we know that in the other nations it was phased, but we've had this lump sum of people going back in one day. What are your views on that? Do you think that we've approached it in the wrong way?
Yeah, I think there's two things I'd say at this stage. One is we would have preferred a phased return, or at least the option. And I think it's clear that some schools are doing that with the testing window they've got this week. Bear in mind that I don't think any head teacher or college principal would be opening their doors to pupils without the risk assessments, without being as sure as they can be that it's safe. And that, plus the scientific advice, I think should provide some reassurance. Of course, once students get back, I think it's important we give them something to look forward to. Of course, we need to focus on the education and wellbeing recovery. And I think there's an understandable concern about catching pupils up. But ultimately, this is a sort of pressure or responsibility that ought to be falling on sort of governments and schools and colleges. We shouldn't, it's not something that children and young people should be made to worry about at this stage. So what might that look like? I mean, today we've suggested that we should have more breakfast clubs in every school and college across the country up to the age of 16, because all of the evidence shows that has positive impacts for learning, health and well-being, attendance, punctuality. It's really good evidence-based intervention there. The government have put some funding in for summer activities, but I think they could be much more ambitious. I mean, after the year they've had, let's give kids a summer to look forward to with all sorts of activities, from sports, music, drama. There are loads of providers out there who've also had a pretty terrible year and would love the opportunity as well as the income to do that. And then, as we've just heard, I do think that the one big hole in the government's catch-up strategy so far has been teaching. And all of the evidence shows that more teaching, better quality teaching is the best way to help pupils to both catch up and get ahead.
Okay,
and
Wes, let's sorry to interrupt there. Yeah, let's move on, because we want to hear a lot from the students, the people that are actually affected and in schools. And Lewis and Josh, back to you. You're in crucial years, in year 11 and 13. You'll be preparing for exams. I mean, it's difficult enough, studying for exams. What are you most worried about now?
I think currently what we're most worried about is the lack of information that we've received. I think the way that teachers are going to assess our grades hasn't really been clarified, and what's going to be taken into account hasn't been detailed by the government. And so I think currently there's kind of a prevailing feeling among students that are undertaking GCSEs and A-levels that we don't know where our grade is going to come from. And so a little bit of clarity on that is probably where we're most worried at the moment.
Yeah, no, it's a difficult time. It's a difficult time, and everybody acknowledges that it's been made worse by the circumstances that we find ourselves in. Well, let's hear from Pippa now. Actually, Pippa's mum has asked a question on her behalf, and her mum would like to know the impact of not having SATs exams, that's right, and how that will affect education. Richard, is she right to be worried? Or really, can the kids just catch up? I mean, they've all been in the same situation, so that is some consolation, isn't it?
Yes, and the first thing I say to Pippa in year 6 is don't worry about missing your SATs. I can assure you that won't have any retrograde effect on you. You'll be absolutely fine. And one of the main functions is to provide good information to help secondary schools get you settled in the right way. And they'll be using other ways of doing that, communicating directly with your teachers to find out what you're capable of doing. And we'll get past the fact there's not no SATs. So don't worry about SATs. I would like to speak to Lewis and Josh, who, I really feel for you, Lewis and Josh. It has been so hard for you. But I want to also try and reassure you that I think what we'll end up with doing, we're still waiting further details, but it's very likely that your grades will be based on a whole variety of different things, almost like a portfolio of work that you've produced over a period of time for your teacher. So they will have make a professional view of what grade you would have got in the examinations based on a variety of things, not one single thing, and nothing will get in the way of them making that judgment with good information. And it is worth saying this to both of you and to all those year 11 and 13 there, that what you do now really matters. You have control over your final grade still, however you've done before, because teachers will be doing work with you, doing little assessment tasks and so forth to find out what you can do based on what you have done, not what you've not done. So please keep working, keep going to school, do the work that's been set, because you still have control over that final grade. You can influence it. So I think that's a really positive thing for you to think of as you go back. And I'm sure that you as students, you will show fantastic resilience. You've learned a lot during this period. You've got the benefit of actually having walked through fire. Yeah. It has tempered you.
Let's see
made you even stronger.
Let's see, thanks very much for that. Let's see what Pippa thinks. Do you feel slightly less worried now having heard that?
Yes, although I do think that I would be missing an opportunity of an experience of doing the SATs, but I am pretty sure that it will not affect me.
I think that prediction is right, Pippa. I think you're going to do very well indeed. Now, finally, there could be long-term implications on the mental health of young people. Dr. Dubica, we've heard much about the impact of this situation that we find ourselves on the mental health of young people. Can you give us your assessment as to how much they might be affected?
Well, we're gradually learning more and more about what's been happening to children, young people. So as I said before, I think the really important message to get through that most children, young people are resilient. They will get through this and they will bounce back. It's not been easy for anybody. And as I've also said, there's been some children, young people who have done a lot better during lockdown because very sadly, they've struggled in school. Maybe they've been bullied, they've had social anxiety, they may have conditions like autism. And it's the most deprived, the most vulnerable children, young people, those who are already struggling before the pandemic, those are the ones I'm the most worried about. So I would see this as a huge opportunity to try and get things right for children and young people now, particularly in the education system. So Richard was talking about the importance of well-being as well, how we need to focus on not just passing exams like SATs and learning the 3 Rs. We also need to be thinking about creativity, about physical activity, music, all those other really, really important parts of the curriculum that maybe we haven't focused on so much over the years. Because we have to remember that although 50% of our children, young people do go on to university, another 50% don't make that and they struggle with learning. And we have to be able to help those children, young people thrive in school and education. And this is a really great opportunity to look at how we're teaching children, young people and what we're placing the most value on as well. And of course, if we want our children to succeed in education, we know that mental health and well-being is absolutely central to that. If you don't have happy, thriving children, they're not going to perform academically either. So I really do think we should seize this moment. And of course, as well, we have to think about our professionals. So if we've got a happy, resilient education teacher workforce, we know that children will do much better as well. And the same goes for the mental health workforce. And I suppose the last point to mention is Richard also mentioned technology. And in my 30 years experience in the NHS, I haven't seen such a huge change in the way we use technology and what can be done so quickly. So we do need to adapt that and use the best of that in education, but also in terms of mental health. And there's a huge potential there to increase access to therapies for many families as well.
OK, I just want to get a quick one sentence, bit of advice for the students now. Back in school, it's very different for them. Wes Streeting, you first.
I think we've already heard the best advice, which is just do your best. Keep doing what you're doing. And, the worst thing you could do now is put loads of self-imposed pressure on you. I think the rest of the country is looking at your generation who've come through this last year with admiration, confidence that you're going to do well and do your best. And also just remember, you're in the same boat as everyone else. Okay. So everyone's had the same challenges this year.
You've gone over your sentence. Okay. Richard, it's your turn.
Just remember that you're not the COVID generation. You're a remarkable generation. Talk up what you do, be confident, go back and bounce back. You'll do brilliantly.
Not the COVID generation, that's what we should remember. Let's get a final thought from one of the pupils on the panel. Sophia, let's talk to you about what you're looking forward to. I know it's a difficult time and the word COVID is bandied about a lot, but as you heard, you're not the COVID generation. What are you looking forward to?
Well, it was really good on my first day of school because I got to see all my friends, and like if I had any questions during lockdown, I'd have to email it to the teacher and like wait for a response. But it's really nice how I just got to like talk to the teacher and like no waiting, I can just talk to her.
So it's great to be back. What are you really looking forward to? Anything? Being back with your friends every day?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you so much for speaking to us. So that's day one of the government's first stage of easing the lockdown restrictions and day one of a new era of learning. There are lots of changes to be made, and as we've heard, the children and the professionals are taking it in their stride. So good luck to all our panellists in the coming months. Good luck with the exams, with the SATs if they present themselves, and all you're looking forward to doing. And thank you to our panel of experts. Thank you also for watching. Good night.